friends, my name is Dasha. Welcome back to my channel, and Happy New Year! Happy 2021! I hope that it's gonna be a blast and we get some actual stuff happening in our personal lives, not in the world, and I wish you a fantastic reading year. I thought I would kick this year off by talking about the books that I want to read this year. So the way I thought I would kind of narrow down this list was incorporate a lot of the things I already physically own, as well as kind of things that I'm excited to read. I also thought I would kind of put a few quote-unquote challenges on here, some books that I want to read but I kind of want to hold myself accountable to, that I'm maybe not, full of excitement to read, maybe there's not hype around them, but I still really am hyped personally to read, and hopefully this list will keep me accountable. Now, last year I did make a 20 for 2020 list, but it was kind of halfway through the year, and my taste in reading has even changed a little bit since then, and I also realized that I put a lot of books on there that were kind of challenges, but also not the most realistic in terms of, again, how my reading goes, and just by putting them, that doesn't mean I'm going to read them necessarily. So a lot of these are books that I am excited for, and there are just a few challenges rather than the other way around. So without any further ado, let's get into them. So one of my soft goals, I didn't really talk about it, but I do want to continue a few series. It's not something I want to stress myself out with because I want to try a bunch of new series this year, but I do want to continue a few, and one of those is An Ember in the Ashes, this series. So the next book that I have is A Torch Against the Night. So this is a young adult fantasy series written by Sabaa Tahir, and it's inspired by ancient Rome, and you follow Elias, who is a student at this military academy, and you also follow Laia, who is a girl posing as a slave to get into the military academy. And so this is the second book in that series. I might have to reread the first one because I read it last February, I believe, and I wasn't really paying attention, so I'd like to reread it in order to get to this and eventually finish the series off, because the fourth book just came out in November, I believe. So I would really like to get to that series and kind of maybe possibly finish it off, or at least read the one that I physically own. I really do still like reading young adult fantasies, even though in general my taste is somewhat moving away, because I find them to be really good palate cleansers in between some heavier fantasy books or nonfiction or classics. And on top of that, this series is kind of almost bordering, it's kind of straddling that line between adult and young adult in terms of how heavy it is, and the gore and the topics and the violence and the themes. It's a lot more heavy-handed than some young adults, so I really do enjoy that aspect to it. So I can't wait to continue this series. Speaking of heavy adult fantasy, I really want to start the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan. I have the first book here, The Eye of the World, and this is a massive epic adult fantasy series spanning 15 books. I think it's 14 plus like a prequel, and I don't even know what it's about, but I just desperately want to get to it because it is so beloved and it is so influential in the adult fantasy genre. And for some reason, I genuinely don't need to know a thing about an adult fantasy series before I go into it. And for me, that's half the fun, you just kind of get thrown into it. I figure I'll enjoy it regardless. So this is one I've had on my radar for a little bit, and I finally said, fuck it, let me get the first book, let me see how I like it, and I'm really hoping to start it soon because it's just sitting there staring at me, and I just have a feeling I'll become a Wheel of Time stan. I'm really hoping. So the next two books are extremely special to me. They were gifted to me by my friend Ray from BOOKMARK Chronicles. We've become quite close over the year of 2020 as we both started our channels that year, and it's been really nice to get to know her, and we've been sending each other books back and forth. And so these two were a gift from her around the holidays, a little bit before. So the first one is The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. This is an adult high fantasy involving dragons and a large world with a ton of characters. I know that everything gets kind of compared to Game of Thrones, but apparently this is similar in the sense that there is a lot of point of views, and it does get quite political, and it is quite dark, and that's a buzzword to me, and I'm really excited. The funny thing about this book is that while everyone that I know reads it loves it, there's not that many people actually talking about it, so I'm quite excited to see for myself what I think of it. I have a feeling I'm going to absolutely love it. I don't read enough books with dragons in them, and they're actually kind of cool, so excited to get to this one. And then the next book she got me was These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. This one's been everywhere lately. This is that young adult Romeo and Juliet retelling set in 1920s Shanghai, And anything 1920s is like a buzzword for me because I love the aesthetic, but I also love all the historical and cultural things happening. And while a lot of 1920s books focus on the US, I don't think I've read any from an Asian perspective. So I am quite curious to see what kind of cultural, societal, social elements are incorporated in here. But again, the aesthetics are just a real winner for me. I love anything 1920s. And if that wasn't enough, I personally actually really do like the play Romeo and Juliet. I know it's quite controversial because obviously 13-year-old girl or whatever, however old she is, running off with a 16-year-old boy and then they both kill themselves. Not some cheery subject matter, but generally I do really love the writing in that play, and I've always enjoyed watching it, as tragic as it is. So I'm really curious to see how this plays out in a retelling in 1920s Shanghai with warring crime gangs. Sounds fantastic if you ask me. Switching gears a little bit, I want to quickly touch on a couple of classics that I have. So the first one is War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. This is a brick of a book and I am extremely intimidated. But if anything the last few months have taught me is that I kind of enjoy the struggle of reading such a big book. I've been reading The Count of Monte Cristo for the last couple months, and while I put it down for a little while, I picked it back up over the holidays, and I found myself really, really enjoying the satisfaction you get of getting through such a big book. And on top of that, obviously these stories have lasted for, a couple hundred years. There's a reason they're so popular, and I would just really like to experience them, even though they do scare the living crap out of me. So even though this one is like 1,400 pages, I am quite excited to get to it. I'm not at the level where I can read it in Russian yet. If you don't know, I do speak Russian. My whole family is Russian. I am Russian, and I would eventually like to be able to read Russian classics in Russian, but I struggle even reading French or English classics, and I speak those languages a lot better than I speak Russian. So it's gonna be a little while, but either way, I would like to at least read it in English first, get an idea for the story and the characters. I'm following someone on Instagram who's currently doing a read of this book, and she seems to be really, really enjoying her time reading it. So I think that I will enjoy it too. It's just a matter of getting down to it and actually doing it, and that's kind of scary. And another classic that I said I was going to get to this year, and I unfortunately haven't, but I think it will happen this year, especially now since I have it physically thanks to my mom, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Now here I have a set of all of her novels, and I don't think I'll get to all of them, but Pride and Prejudice is just so beloved, and I'd love to be able to read it before watching the movie so I can kind of get a better appreciation for the original work that it comes from. But I never got around to reading Austen, and my mom loves Austen. She got me this incredible edition of all of the novels from Jane Austen, and it's got these like incredible end pages, and it's got the little ribbon bookmark, which I love. So I really, really want to get to Pride and Prejudice this year. I feel like I know it's one of those really readable classics that everyone loves, so I don't really have any excuse at this point. Funnily enough, this one is also a gift from my mom. It is, well, the complete works of Charles Dickens, but specifically I want to read Great Expectations. I know that he is a beloved author, but he's a little bit difficult, and I feel like, again, now that I have a physical copy of his books, it might be a little more enticing to get into them. I also know that he's just such an inspirational author for a lot of other authors that came after him, so it would be really, really nice to kind of get into his work and see what it's all about. In here I have Oliver Twist, A Christmas Carol, Great Expectations, and A Tale of Two Cities, but I think I am specifically interested in Great Expectations because I kind of know the story of Oliver Twist and A Christmas Carol, so I'd like to experience something a little bit new. If that is the wrong way to go about Dickens though, let me know, and if I should maybe start with a familiar story to get used to his writing. I don't know if that's maybe the right path to take. If anyone's read Dickens, let me know in the comments, but I think that I'm quite interested to just completely dive into something I know nothing about, and that is Great Expectations for me. So that is one I want to get to this year. Now for a classic fantasy, I need to finally get my ass into J.R.R. Tolkien. So here I have The Fellowship of the Ring, the first of the 3 books in the Lord of the Rings series. Technically it's all one book, we all know this, blah 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 blah. I only have the first one. I've never read The Hobbit, I have never watched The Hobbit, I have never watched Lord of the Rings. I don't really even know the story even, to be quite honest with you, but I would absolutely love to. I heard that the movies are works of art in their own right, and obviously a lot of fantasy books are just building off the foundations that Tolkien put down, so I would really, really love to get to his work this year and kind of see the influence that he's had on my favorite genre. I think it would just be really cool, so this is one that I'm gonna try to prioritize this year. On the topic of adult fantasy, I also have The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. This is V.E. Schwab's latest book. Everyone's been talking about it, everyone's been raving about it. I've had it pre-ordered and it has been sitting in my room since October, and I have not touched it because I just got sidetracked with other things. And it's time, I have to read it. I'm excited to read it. I definitely will pick it up sometime this year. It just hasn't happened, so I'm putting it on this list as a kind of realistic / attainable book that I will most likely get to this year. This is a story of a woman who is going to be married and she doesn't really want to, and she's living in 18th century France perhaps, and she essentially runs away and prays to gods that she's not supposed to pray to, and they make her a deal where she gets to live forever but nobody remembers her. So it's her life story. I think it follows like 300 years of her life, and I'm super excited. Apparently this book touches people on a really, really personal level that you kind of wouldn't expect it to, so I'm excited to see how I feel. I have a feeling I'm going to absolutely love it. The next book, funnily enough, I'm planning on starting sometime this week, so this is perfect. But it was on my list anyways, so I thought I would kind of shoehorn it in here, and that's The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This is the birth of dark academia in a sense. Like, everyone always quotes this book as being the forebear of the dark academia genre because of the subject matter. It is about a boy who is at a really like kind of elite arts college, and he meets a group of pretentious students studying the classics, and basically somewhere along the line some murder happens. That's about all I know. It is a lot of people's favorite book. It is an extremely beloved book. I have read If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, which is said to be a kind of copy and paste of this but with Shakespeare, so hopefully I enjoyed this a lot more than I enjoy If We Were Villains because I didn't really like it that much. But overall, I know that this is like an absolutely beloved book. It appeals to my pretentious side because I love the classics as well. So we'll see how I feel about it. And the last of my physical books, and I mentioned this in my video that I did of RAE'S book tag at the end of the year. I'll link that if you haven't seen it. It is The Book of S by J.J. Abrams and Doug Dorst. This is just so intimidating to me because it is not just a book. Oh no, they made it complicated. And it is a book called The Ship of Theseus. But inside the book, there are two people writing back and forth to one another, and you are essentially supposed to follow along with that. And as if that wasn't enough, there's different colors indicating different times that they read the book. So you can see there's different colors when they're, oh no, I don't know where that came from. Oh no! I think this was not in any page. This book has a bunch of interactive elements. There are letters that they wrote. There are these like photo cards. There are postcards. There's a napkin with a drawing on it. There's just a lot of these really cool, see the postcard. There's a lot of these really cool interactive elements, and the reason I've been just putting off reading this book, even though I was extremely excited when I got it, is because I'm just so intimidated. Do I read the actual Ship of Theseus first and then go back and read all of the annotations? Or do I read the annotations along with the book? Do I read one chapter of the actual book and then go back and read the annotations? It like stresses me out. There's too many things going on. I don't understand what I'm supposed to do with this book. I don't know, maybe I should look it up on the internet, see if there's any like lore around this book, see if there's like a correct reading pattern. But I've been wanting to sink my teeth into this since I got it, but something's been holding me back because it's a book that I need to focus on, I guess. It's not a book I can like lay in bed right before I go to bed and like just flip through it. It's a book I need to like sit down and really pay attention to because of all these little elements, and I guess that kind of intimidates me. I should probably stop being a big old chicken and just read it this year. And I am excited to, obviously. Like, it's a really interesting looking book because the basic premise, so these are two people that are looking into the author, V.M. Straka. He's a very, very mysterious person. They're not really sure who he is, and they're trying to basically go through the book and pick out all the meaning of the book and pick out all of the possible clues to who V.M. Straka is. There's even like an introduction at the beginning of the book by someone who's supposedly researching VM Straka and who possibly knew him, and they're like, maybe this guy never knew him at all. Maybe this guy is VM Straka for all we know. And it's just like, it's interesting. It's just absolutely terrifying because I don't know what to expect. And I also feel like this book would take so much extra time because of all these elements. And what if I go through all of this and wind up actually hating it and thinking it's a bad book that just has cool elements? I don't know. I stress myself out all the time. Are we surprised at this point? God, not at all. So that is it for the books I own. Now we're gonna go through some books that I either have on my iPad, either through Scribd or on my Apple Books, or some books that I actually just have to pick up. So the next book I want to talk about, I did also talk about my 20 books for 2020. That is The Blood of Elves by Andrzej Sapkowski. This is the first official book, I think, in the Witcher series, which is about Geralt, who is a witcher, who I believe is some kind of warlock, who hunts monsters. Not 100% sure on that. I just want to read it. I'm itching to watch the Netflix show, but I want to read at least some of it first. I've also been itching to play the game, but I know that it's a game you have to sink like a ton of time into, so I just don't want to start that while I have school happening, because I'm just gonna get sucked into it. I remember when I got Zelda for the first time on my Switch, I couldn't do anything else. My mind was just completely focused on that game, and apparently this is like just as expansive of a world and there's so many things to do. So anyways, that was a bit of a sidetrack because we're talking about the book. I have this on my iPad on Apple Books. I got a deal on it and I've been kind of meaning to get to it. For some reason, my brain is telling me that I can't read it unless I have it physically, but I'm like, you already spent $2.99 on it. Just fucking read it on your iPad. It's not that complicated. And then my brain goes, no, high fantasy is meant to be read on physical book. You cannot. Listen, I don't pretend to understand how my own brain works. But that is one I really want to read. Additionally, I feel like a broken record, The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. The fourth book in the Stormlight Archive just came out, and I haven't even read the first one, and I want to join in on all the Brandon Sanderson fun. I have the first one. Do I know what the series is about? Absolutely not. Do I still want to read it? Fuck yeah, I do. Speaking of Brandon Sanderson, I have this book on the way to me. It is The Final Empire, the first book in the Mistborn Era 1 trilogy. This is about people who can ingest metals to perform magic, and then if you can ingest all the metals, which is where you are a Mistborn, and then there's some kind of insurrection plot, I believe. Listen, Brandon Sanderson is beloved. Apparently this series is really good if you're used to young adult fantasy but are trying to get into adult fantasy. And while I don't have an issue with getting into adult fantasy, it's probably a good introduction point for Brandon Sanderson in general because I've never read anything from him, so I'm excited for that. Speaking of books on the way to me, I have The Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb on the way, the first book in the Farseer trilogy. As far as I know, it follows Fitz, who's the bastard of the king, and they're kind of trying to decide what to do with him, so they make him the royal assassin. So it just kind of follows his life. It's apparently a fantastic series. The whole world that is set in, I know there's a ton of trilogies even within that world. And a lot of people are currently reading the Live Ship Traders series, which is like the one following the Farseer trilogy. And apparently it's like super incredible. Robin Hobb is becoming everyone's like favorite writer, and I'm like, fuck, I need to get in on that. So I'm excited to read Assassin's Apprentice and get started on that. That is another one this year. Yes, there's a lot of fantasy on this list. We know that fantasy is like my favorite thing. I don't want to hear it. I'm also trying to catch up for 4 years of not being involved in the book community, so cut me a little bit of a break. The next book I want to talk about is a little different. It is Freakonomics by two guys named Steve. I can't remember their names. This is a really interesting premise, and my boyfriend read it and he really loved it. It's basically a couple of economists look at problems from an economist's perspective. So it's things that you wouldn't necessarily, how do I explain this? I think one of the premises is like why suicide bombers should get life insurance and why, fuck, I need to look it up. This is gonna bug me because I'm really not selling this book, but it's like a super well-known and well-loved book. So, Freakonomics, a rogue economist explores the hidden side of everything. I'm just reading off Goodreads. Which is more dangerous, a gun or swimming pool? What do school teachers and sumo wrestlers have in common? Why do drug dealers still live with their moms? How much do parents really matter? What kind of impact did Roe and Wade have on violent crime? So it's kind of like re-examining these really dumb questions from an economist perspective, and from the one time I took an economics class for half a semester, before I dropped it because I was awful. It is a really interesting stats-based perspective, and they always look for like correlation and causation between stuff, so I'm really curious to see how I feel about this. And apparently there's a sequel called Super Freakonomics, so if I really enjoy it, there's that. And this book is split up into like smaller sections, all the sections kind of touching on individual topics, so it feels like it's one that I'll be able to read quite easily because it's going to be kind of like mini articles. I love books that are structured like that. That is like such a fun way to get through nonfiction. So the next book I really want to read is Severance by Ling Ma. This is a kind of apocalyptic sci-fi, but also like literary fiction novel. I believe it has to do with some kind of plague, but it's also a, like, if I'm not mistaken, someone correct me, but I think it's also like a critique on office politics and on office culture and just general work culture. And I've just heard some really good things, and it seems kind of short, which is always nice. But I just kind of want to start reading a bit more literary fiction, so I feel like this is a good between like my current interests in like science fiction and, you know, dystopian apocalyptic novels and literary fiction, because it kind of works with the kind of thematic content that literary fiction works with. So I'm kind of excited to pick this up and dip my toes into literary fiction because that was one of my goals for this year. So I have a couple of classics slash modern classics that I want to touch on. First is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Don't know what this is about, but everyone loves it. There's a bunch of retellings. It is a beloved classic, not just like a classic, but like a loved classic. So I want to give this one a shot. I also really want to read A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. This is a kind of, I know the synopsis of this one at least. I know that this is basically a futuristic England where there's a lot of Russian culture involved for some reason, like half the words are in Russian, and there's a lot of like ultra violence on the streets, and you follow Alex, who is like the leader of a group of friends that terrorize the whole city, and there's a little bit of social commentary involved, there's a little bit of science involved. I have watched maybe 3/4 of the movie. I never got around to finishing it because I always start it when I'm tired and I fall asleep, and it's not because it's boring, it's just that I am not a movie person. I'm really excited to read the book. I have started the book at some point as well, but I think I was reading it on audiobook and the narrator was British and the accent was throwing me off because the Russian words were butchered so horrifically that I couldn't even understand for the longest time what words he was even trying to say. And like, listen, I understand it must be even harder for people that don't speak Russian to get through this book, but I was struggling. So I need to read it on my own without the narrator because I'll at least understand what I'm reading. And the last of the kind of modern classics I want to touch on is Battle Royale by Kushun Takami. So this is a pretty classic like tale, I think, or the premise at least. A bunch of school kids get thrown into the arena with guns and they all have to fight until one is left standing. Hunger Games is often compared as like the lesser version of Battle Royale. I kind of want to push myself to keep reading translated works, and I know that this one is obviously originally Japanese. I also know that the premise is something that I love. I've always been a Hunger Games stan. I love the premise of Last Man Standing. I think it's fantastic. Apparently this book is like brutal and disgusting, and I'm here for it, so excited for that one. Almost done, folks. The next book I want to talk about is The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kong. This is the sequel to The Poppy War, which is a massively popular and beloved adult fantasy series that kind of deals with the Opium Wars and a little bit of similarities to, I think, the Rape of Nanking as well. It follows Rin, who is a girl from like a poor village, but she's extremely intelligent, and she is accepted into this elite military academy where she also learns the art of shamanism, and there's a lot of like lore and gods involved, and I loved The Poppy War. I've had the sequel just like sitting staring at me from both Scribd and my accidental purchase from Apple Books as well, and it's just like sitting there and it's like, you have to read me, and I'm like, you're fucking right, I do. And now I'm debating if I want to buy the whole trilogy because I really love The Poppy War and I'd be down to reread it. It was actually a really quick read. I kind of want to annotate it and I want to own it anyways, so... But then I'm like, but then you can just go straight ahead and read The Dragon Republic. But I don't mind rereading The Poppy War because I feel like I was just so excited to know what was happening that I missed some of the finer points about the characters, and I don't know. Either way, I really do want to read the sequel. I want to keep going on this series, and I really, really love it. And I want to know how it ends because there's just so much going on that I'm curious to see how Rebecca continues with her plots, because there's a lot happening and I loved it all, especially the gods. The shamanism was just, oh, mind-boggling, fantastic. I need to continue it. The penultimate book is Gyo by Junji Ito. This is one of his horror mangas, and it is about a small town that a couple are visiting, and they notice a very strange smell, and that is all I needed to know because I read Uzumaki by Junji Ito and I fucking loved it last year. I have not been able to get the images out of my mind, and Gyo is another one of his beloved works, so I am really, really excited to get to it. Apparently there's like a fish with really gross legs. I'm here for all of it. And they're really quick reads. Even though Uzumaki was like 600 pages, I flew through it in like a couple hours. It was so much fun. So fucking gross. Fantastic. And the last book is The Good House by Taranarive Due. This is a horror novel, and I believe it has something to do with a woman returning to the house in which her son killed himself, and just some pretty spooky stuff. A couple of people I follow have read it and have absolutely loved it. I also noticed that it is by a Black woman, and there's not a lot of horror written by people of color in general, not a lot of horror written by women, so this is kind of interesting. I feel like it might bring a different perspective into the horror genre because a lot of it is dominated by white men, so it could be really interesting to see what kind of discussions that Taranarive could bring into this genre. So really, really excited for that one. I've heard, again, nothing but good things. It is a lot larger, but I do tend to enjoy big books because they bring more story and more development, so I'm really excited for this one. I think I've said really excited a million fucking times in this goddamn video, but like, I have this like mountain of books sitting here, if you could see my desk, and like, I'm looking at them all and I'm like, my babies, even though I haven't read a single one of them. Like, I'm just really, really excited to get to all of them. Rediscovering books has been one of the greatest things I have done for myself, and I'm excited to see what 2021 brings in terms of my reading. If any of you have read any of these, please let me know which ones to prioritize, which ones were your favorite, which ones are maybe worth skipping. Otherwise, my social media is linked down below. You guys can always come talk to me there. It is so nice to be back. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!